Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Library and Museum. If you have not been in this space yet, we welcome you back to explore the collections on the day when we have a docent available. It's some really fascinating stuff. My name is Priya. I'm the head of adult services here at Forbes Library. If you have any questions or ideas or feedback, please come find me and I will happily chat with you about it after the program. I will be set up just in the back of the room during the program itself, so please also come grab me if you need anything during the event. We are live streaming this event on our YouTube channel. Hello, live stream friends. Hence why I'm standing so very awkwardly in front of you two. It's on the camera. For those of you who are watching from home, you are on our YouTube channel. If you have any comments or questions or feedback, please get in touch with us by email after the event. That would be at reference@forbeslibrary.org, or come find me. I'm usually at the reference desk as well. We will also have the recording posted on our YouTube channel to watch after the event itself, which should be posted sometime tomorrow or maybe the day after. For those of you in the room, if you need a restroom or water fountain, that will be directly outside the Coolidge Museum here into the Arts and Music Department and take a left. There are 2 restrooms and a water fountain as well. Our closest exits are out the stairs and the elevator, probably the ones that you came up in to get here. Aside from that, I think we're ready to get started. Awesome. So we are here to celebrate Buju's new book that just came out. Very exciting. Change the Wallpaper, Transforming Cultural Patterns to Build More Just Communities. And you probably already know what this book is about, but just in case, we will hear from a social psychologist revealing how to nudge local cultures toward positive structural change by moving people from individual action to collective action. Some questions that will be asked are, how can ordinary people fight for social justice? And can individual actions change structural inequality? Big topics, but this is a good place for us to think about them. I will be introducing Carrie, and Carrie will introduce our author. Carrie N. Baker, JD, PhD, is the Bowman Professor of American Studies and Chair of the Program for the Study of Women, Gender, and Sexuality at Smith College. Her research and teaching focus on gender, law, public policy, and feminist social movements. Baker has written 5 books, including her recent open access book, Abortion Pills, U.S. History and Politics, from Amherst College Press. We will also be having you here for an author talk in a couple months, so please do come back. She is a regular writer and contributing editor at Ms. Magazine and has a monthly column in the Daily Hampshire Gazette. I did not mention, but there are also books for sale from Broadside Bookshop out in the hallway there in the gallery, so please do stop by after the event and purchase a copy if you haven't already. All right, with that, I will pass it to Carrie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya. Great to be here. Welcome, everybody. So I want to start by introducing Buja. That's the nickname, but Buja's full name, as you see from the book, is Nilanjana Dasgupta. She is a Provost Professor of Psychology and founding director of the Institute of Diversity Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. She is a leader in research on implicit bias and science-driven interventions to create positive culture change. Her passion is to translate science for social good. Her research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and she has won many awards, including the Hidden Bias Research Award from the Kapoor Center for Social Impact in Silicon Valley. Also, the Application of Personality and Social Psychology Award and the UMass Chancellor's Award for Outstanding Accomplishments in Research and Creative Activity. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Boston Globe, Scientific American Mind, and National Public Radio. Her new book, which is what we will be discussing today, is called Change the Wallpaper, Transforming Cultural Patterns to Build More Just Communities, published by Yale University Press just last month. So welcome. So great to have you here today. And I do want to mention, I Tom Weiner introduced us, I think, by email, and we didn't know each other, and we got together at Woodstar and immediately connected and chatted for forever, and then we proceeded to help each other out a lot. And it's been this wonderful relationship. So I write regularly for Ms. Magazine, so I connected Bujo with Ms. to write a piece for Ms. And then she had just published a piece in The Hill, so she connected me with The Hill, and I published a piece in The Hill. So it's just been this, and then actually I got the gig to do my book talk here because of Bujo, because of this.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I owe you one. So. But no, it's just been a wonderful relationship, and I've really appreciated getting to know you and your work. So I want to start, first of all, by asking you the title of the book obviously has this metaphor of wallpaper, and in the book you tell a story that's behind that metaphor, and I was wondering if you could share that story with us.
Sure. So first of all, let me just say, there's a lot of food outside. So I hope you will all eat all that food because we're not taking it home. That's thing one. Thing two is we didn't cover the president and his wife because they're part of the metaphor. So here's the story. So 10 years ago, in 2015, our son was getting ready to go for his college visits. And we lived, Al and I, my husband lived in Windsor, Connecticut. And the Windsor public schools was 50% black, students were, and 30% white. And the remaining student body was Hispanic, Asian, and multiracial. So this kid, Alex, our son, that was the water in which he was. Those were his friends. That's what his student body was. But he wanted to play baseball, and he also wanted an academically rigorous college. But he was not big enough for a D1 school. So the colleges he was aiming for was D3 school, a liberal arts college. And so he ended up going for a campus visit to a small liberal arts college in Maine. And when he walked onto the campus, I wasn't there, my husband and he went. He said to my husband very quickly, "Dad, it's so white here." And so the campus visit happened. They went, saw the athletic director, saw baseball, went to classes, and then they came back to Windsor, Connecticut. And my husband told me that story, and he said, Alex's wallpaper changed. And so essentially what he was saying is that for this kid, he had expected that all high schools, that college would be similar, that it would be this multiracial environment where the friends he had here would be the same kinds of environments there wherever he went. Even though he was 18 years old and he knew he had played travel baseball, it just didn't quite click until he was in a different environment. And in that different environment, he suddenly realized it was not all the same. So that statement, his wallpaper changed, stayed in my mind for the next 10 years. And then when the pandemic hit, I decided it was time to write a book. And for me, that his wallpaper changed, it was the power of the situation. That we don't notice the situation we're in that influences our thoughts and behavior, because that's the water we are in, that's the air we breathe, whatever the metaphor we want to use. We only notice it when we step out of it. Then we look back and we see the wallpaper. So I thought, change the wallpaper. The wallpaper is that metaphor. So I owe the title of the book to my husband. I've been hanging on to it for 10 years.
So, by the way, who's sitting on the front row right over here? So, yay for the husband. My next question was, why did you write the book now? Obviously, you've been working on the book for 10 years. And it's based on social science research that you yourself have done, as well as others. And you're trying to use this social science research to think about how environments affect people and people's ability to succeed or fit in or thrive. And so I guess, so let me, before we talk about that, I just want to say, why did you write the book now? And I mean, we're at a very particular moment, obviously. I'm sure some of you have noticed. And so it feels very important right now. Is it just good timing?
No, I actually didn't think I was going to write a book. So I'm in a field in the part of the social sciences where we write journal articles. So book writing was not on my radar until the pandemic. But the reason I started thinking about it is because in the 25 years of my academic career, I've given hundreds of talks, not just to academics, but to legal scholars, to judges, to people in the business world, to law enforcement, to nonprofits, to all kinds of places, essentially on my work, which is on implicit bias, and especially not just on how the mind works, how we categorize people into groups, how that happens automatically, how we can change that, what's the evidence for it, and how can those those changes last. What I came to realize is that the people who invited me to give those talks, and also the audience members, sort of implicitly, tacitly assumed that accurate information from the sciences that awareness would change their beliefs, beliefs would change their behavior, behavior would change the culture in which they were, and that culture change would somehow change policies and structures. So they were implicitly connecting the dots between awareness and information that I was giving them, to belief change, to behavior change, to culture change, to policy and structure, so going up. But I knew as a scientist that that evidence wasn't there. That belief change didn't mean behavior change. Behavior change doesn't mean culture change. Culture change doesn't mean policy change. So so that was one thing. At the same time, there's this cottage industry of these trainings of variety of sorts, unconscious bias training and cultural competence training and this, that, and the other thing. Most of it was not really science-driven. Some of it was by people whose work I really like. So I started reading that work to see, okay, what is the evidence? Like, what changes? How long does it last? Does it really change behavior? Does it change hiring? Does it change climate? The answer is no and no. It changes some beliefs, it changes some awareness, doesn't change hiring, it doesn't change climate, doesn't change feelings of belonging. It became very clear that that's not where the action is. If we want to do something, we're not going to get the bang for the buck there. So I think it's at that point of time I thought there's a book to be written. And I needed the headspace to write it, and that was the pandemic. So that's why I decided to write it.
So, I mean, this is a deeply scholarly book, but it's written in an accessible way. It's full of stories. It's published with Yale University Press, but your ability to translate that scholarship to a public audience, to somebody that, has no background in this area, maybe works at a company or works in a government office, is truly amazing and wonderful that you've done this work. I want to ask you, what's the core argument of the book? What are you arguing?
Yeah, I think it's related to, a couple of questions ago. The core argument, there's sort of 5 things to it. The core argument starts with this idea that if we want to, that positive culture change requires far more than awareness and accurate information. and belief change. If we want to change behavior, targeting people's beliefs is not a good place to start. That's thing one. Why? Because behavior, our human behavior, is changed by a whole lot other stuff. For example, the roles we occupy, the expectations that come with those roles. If I'm a leader, there are a whole bunch of stuff that I'm supposed to do, and a whole bunch of other stuff I'm not supposed to do. The opinions of other people around us, our peers, our bosses, our spouses, the influencers. There are all kinds of people whose opinions influence our behavior. The physical design of places that influence who we come into contact with. There are all these other competing influences that affect our behavior, sometimes far more than our personal opinions. So that's the second point of the argument. The third one is that those influences, situational forces, which I'm calling the wallpaper collectively, influence our thoughts and behavior in small incremental ways. They're so small that on an everyday basis they seem trivial. But like interest in a bank account, they compound over time. And so on an everyday basis, on a monthly basis, they are like cents. But on a yearly basis, on a lifetime, they're significant, right? So those compounding effects are ones that can be positive, they can be compounding interest, or they can be negative, compounding fees, if you will. You can see I love metaphors. So those compounding effects, positive or negative, accumulate over time, but because on a daily basis they are so small, we don't notice them. They fade into the background, right? So that's point number 3. If we want to change them, we can't change them as individuals. Why? Because this power of the situation is so strong that individuals get exhausted, we get delegitimized, we get sidelined, and so we can't really act individually. The only way to overcome the power of situations is by banding together with others who can also see the wallpaper and acting collectively. That doesn't necessarily mean a big protest. It can mean small actions, but it's not one and done. So those collective actions, there are sort of 3 principles to it. The collective actions are marathons. They're not a sprint, so it's repeated nudges. They are best if they are about material, they are targeting material things, resources, food, housing, like resources, not symbolic things, not mission statements, not lawn signs. Those might make us feel good, but they don't change inequality. Material stuff changes inequality. So that's the second thing. I forget what the third thing was. So local. One of my favorite statements is local action has more traction. That action, this goes back to the moment we are in, national stuff gets diluted by other forces that individuals have no control over. We just cannot control those. Our control is here where we live and work. So if we act collectively in the local sphere where we live and work, and we nudge persistently in small ways with others, targeting some things that are material, over time we will change things incrementally. As a collective, but not as individuals. So I think that's sort of the argument, and I try to make it, and I know we'll get to it later on, in a way that people can see it, not just through science. Science sometimes is too dry, like people can't quite get it. That's where the stories comes in.
Yeah, can you share another story from the book? Because you told one at the beginning, and I know that you have stories about social networks and the importance of social networks, or the physical environment. Like you said, it's these small things. Can you tell a story that gives an example of that?
I think the example of organizing and small things that lead to big things is actually metropolitan health. Let me find the right page number. Okay, so this starts in the 1980s. And this is a real organization, but their name is masked for privacy. At Metropolitan Healthcare, a group of gay and lesbian employees gathered informally over dinner in 1985. Their dinner conversations sparked a monthly event with a slightly larger group of employees. By 1989, this group had grown to 15 employees who had become visible within their organization as an informal gay and lesbian group. In 1993, the group sent 2 of its informal leaders to approach management and advocate for 3 pressing issues: expansion of the company's non-discrimination statement to include sexual orientation, expansion of the company-sponsored health benefits to include domestic partners of gay and lesbian employees who couldn't get legally married at the time in the United States, and improvement of the sometimes hostile climate toward gay and lesbian workers. 2 years later, the company's leaders expanded the organizational non-discrimination statement. The workplace climate was slowly improving. Healthcare benefits for the partners of LGBT employees proved to be a longer-term issue that eventually resolved in 2004. The story of Metropolitan Healthcare is a perfect example of how informal individual interactions grow into relationships, start conversations about shared concerns and inequalities, and create grassroots alliance around these issues, leading people to act collectively and purposefully to push for structural change within their organization. For the first 15 years or so, the LGBT group was informal, operating without official recognition. In 2000, its members asked for company recognition as an employee network, naming themselves LGBT and Allies Network, and including transgender people within their scope, with the idea that official recognition would advance their cause. Along the way, employees in this group reached out to straight coworkers, managers, and the employee union to inform, educate, and convert them into allies. Similar activities were taking place at other companies across the US. Momentum accelerated in the early 2000s when the adoption of domestic partner benefits at large companies led to systemic change in the civil rights of gays and lesbians in the US. Employees with same-sex partners finally began to see policy changes and material benefits to address long-standing inequalities. So you see, it was a 30-year-ish movement.
Yeah, and that it started not from the top with the change in a policy, but
starting at the bottom.
At the bottom with real people's lives, connecting with other people, explaining why this was an important issue. And then I remember back in the day when laws started changing, being impressed that a lot of companies already had these policies. Yeah. And I guess it was because of that kind of activism.
And even before the activism, it was dinners, social dinners. And I bet there are people in this room who were part of those social dinners. I bet there are people in this room who know more about this than I do. So yeah, I'm just telling the story. There are people who lived it in this room. So I think that's how it starts. That's how it starts.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about your writing process and how you went about writing this book. I mean, you're an academic. You write scholarly articles published in peer-reviewed journals. How did you do this very different? And this is, of course, the audience it is scholars, but it's much broader than scholars. How did you make that shift?
Okay, I have to confess, I'm a little bit tired of writing for for scholarly audiences. I think I'm in a stage of my career that's not the audience I'm trying to reach. I really am not. That's the audience my students are trying to reach, and some of my students are in the room, both graduate and undergraduate. The audience I'm trying to reach are people like you, The audience I'm trying to reach are people who are interested in justice, people who are change makers, people who are both grassroots and people who are gatekeepers, and people who can open doors. That's the audience I'm trying to reach. So that means I need to write differently. So I think around 2004 when I started speaking to different audiences. So it started with lawyers and judges and these different kinds of audiences. I started practicing speaking differently. And with this book, I realized that when I talk about things like power of the situation, cultural myth, implicit bias, these concepts are so abstract. People outside the academy have a hard time getting their hands around it. Heck, people in the natural sciences have a hard time getting their arms around it. So I needed something else to be a hook. So for me, there were 3 hooks. Metaphors, especially metaphors like wallpaper, where I could show, here's something, you've been in a room with wallpaper. You know that that shapes the aesthetics of the experience you have, whether it's a formal room or an informal room. It affects how we behave, how we feel, whether we are stiff or whether we are comfortable, whether we talk to other people or we don't. So I used metaphors, I used stories, and I used illustrations. I think there were friends of mine, Adam and Maddie here in the front, who something that they said made me realize I needed visuals to get to people who are visually oriented. So in the book, there are these breadcrumbs. Every chapter has a visual, and that visual represents the theme of the chapter. And the second part of the book has a cycle of steps that shows how change happens. So I think the pictures were for one group of people who are visually oriented. The stories were to hit the heart. And the story is the hook that every chapter starts with a story to meet the audience, to meet the reader or the listener with something that is like us. But then to show that this is not just one person, I then backed into the science to say, this is not just one person. There are many people behind this one person. And then I also wanted to show that there are reasons why this thing happened to this person, or this person feels this way, or whatever the thing is. And there's either a psychology of it, there's a sociology of it, there is a architecture behind it. And that's where the science and social science, or biology in some cases, or public health in other cases, came in. But then I would weave back to another story. And essentially the chapter was like a braid or like a tapestry, with stories and science and sometimes pictures all interwoven. And sometimes those characters would come back in another chapter. And then every chapter ended with, here are the takeaways. Here are the 3 things or 5 things I want you to carry into the next chapter, just so that the threads were closed. Otherwise, it's just like a lecture or a lesson, like when I taught today. I don't want to leave my students with, okay, now we are done. They need to know, here are the thing, I'm a person of bullet points. Here are the 3 bullet points, or as my colleagues say, here are the 3 buckets of things I want you to carry with you. So I want them to know the takeaways. So I think my tools are metaphors, stories, and pictures. So those are the ways I make it concrete.
Wonderful. So I have 2 more questions, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you. So I hope you're thinking of your questions. My next question is, in the Trump era, where DEI programs and initiatives are being rolled back, how can this book offer a different approach and that might also fly under the radar to meet the goals of justice?
Isn't that right? Yeah, isn't that how far the pendulum has swung? So I was thinking of this question, and there are many ways to answer it. So I think my first answer is that is to go local. I think we obviously we have to stay aware of what's going on at the national stage and act in whatever way we can. But our energy on the national stage, that's not where we as ordinary individuals who are not at the level of policymakers, assuming most of us in this room are not. That's not where our leverage is. Our leverage is in the local sphere. So I would say find an issue or issues that fire you up in the local sphere where you live and work, and focus on that and find organize around that, and I guess I would say focus on something that is material, that's related to justice. That's one thing. The second thing I would say that I was thinking of when I read today's the Office of Civil Rights thing in the Chronicle of Higher Education, for those of you who've seen it, I think anything that is group-based, so today's guidance from the Office of Civil Rights was a very expansive reading of the Supreme Court decision, saying that the Students for Affirmative Action, the SSFA case, that should be read not just about college admissions and just about admissions, but expansively about anything to do with race-conscious issues in higher education should be banned. Otherwise, you will lose your federal funding. So I think the more we can think about universal programs rather than group-based programs, at least in these 4 years, we would be, at least in higher education, wise to think in that way, or at least frame our programs in that way. That's one reason Social Security has lasted as long as it has. I think universal programs, universal framings have lasted. I also started thinking about states like California and Texas, and especially California and what it did post Proposition 209, learning lessons from that. But I think I'll focus my points on the first one. I think for us as individuals, going local is probably the first thing I would suggest, and then I think leaning more heavily on programs that bring everybody together rather than being identity group based would be the second thing I would say.
All right. So my last question before I turn to you for your questions, I'm giving you some warnings here, is what are some tangible steps each of us might take to transform cultural patterns to build more just communities wherever we live or work? Like you said at the end of each chapter, you have some takeaways. What are some takeaways for us from the book?
Yeah. I think we need to mix more. I think we are too segregated. I was thinking, I was on Bill Newman's radio show, and I was thinking about how much here in Northampton we are segregated by social class. How segregated we are. There are those of us with means, and then there are those who are struggling economically. And those two communities, and there's a group in between, there's very little interaction. I really think we need communal, if we can advocate for more communal interactions, not just one-offs, but more regular social interactions. So how? I like dialogue groups, either both based on storytelling, like the ones that my friend Linda Baker does, also based on issues. the things I like about dialogue groups that I've participated in with Linda and others is that they have some community norms. They have some guidance, right? It's not free for all. So everybody has equal speaking time. It's not a debate. It's when somebody speaks, everybody else is quiet. There's no interruptions. It's a way to share ideas and listen and sort of think about complex issues, if it's issue-based, or it's about personal stories. It's not a debate forum. So I like dialogue groups as one thing. I like storytelling as another. I like movies and shows and discussions after that, especially around topics and communities that we don't know much about, as another idea. Things that essentially bring us together for social mixing. I think that's the general theme. And dialogue groups, storytelling, community gatherings are just instances of how we might do it. I'm not wedded to a particular thing. Some other ways we might do it that have come up in other places where I've talked to others is that are magnets. 3 examples: music, food, team sports. Those 3 things have come up repeatedly in different places. Team sports is the way people meet with, see, and become friends with others who are different than them. Music is a way people, fusion music, and just it's a way to connect. If you haven't heard them, Playing for Change is a global music on YouTube that Al and I just landed on them during the pandemic and just loved them. It's just music is one, and food. So if we could use them in some way as a soft entry into something more difficult. Anyway, so social mixing, and I had 2 other ideas that I'm blanking on right now, but I think it'll come back to me. I'll mention one more and then I'll stop. For those of us who are educators, coaches, managers, parents, I think I want to say something about talent. There's a whole bunch of research that shows that talent is made, not born. We think of talent we have all these gifted programs, which is based on the idea that talent is innate. You are born gifted. But actually, the research shows that talent there's a potential, there's a seed, but really the work is done more by the fertile soil. So think of it as seed and soil. That's the metaphor. Seed is the potential, but really the action is the fertile soil. And in that fertile soil, research shows there's a bunch of ingredients that if we put those ingredients in that soil, relationships and social sensitivity to the person who we are trying to train, a culture of repeated practice, honest critical feedback, reward for improving rather than reward for perfection, connecting the work somebody is doing to something that is personally meaningful to them, autonomy to do it their way, and there's a few other things. Putting those ingredients in the training ground allows that potential to grow into excellence in their own way. When you do that potential grows far bigger than if we take a bright, shining seed. I'm mixing metaphors, and put it in a soil that is just not good. In the book, I tell a story that I don't want to reveal now of somebody who we think is brilliant, but turns out that if you saw him when he was very young, you wouldn't think he was brilliant. You would think he was pretty mediocre. So I'll stop there. So I think for those of us who are educators and parents, I think we should shift the way we think of talent and train our kids and our young people and our students and our athletes differently.
I am now going to open it up to questions. Yes, thank you so much.
I'll just ask that you raise your hand, please, so I can bring the mic to you so our neighbors watching from home can hear you as well. Who wants to start? Oh, come, friends, be brave. Right here. There you go.
Bonjour,
Janet.
Professor Dasgupta. I've been taking a little road trip in my mind as I read the book and as you've been speaking. And I didn't know I was going to take it, but I've been traveling around the places I've lived in my long life, winding up in Northampton, and also the lovely New England towns that attract all of us. And so now I'm putting you in the car with me for the first time coming into Northampton. What does the wallpaper look like? What does it say to you of the town of Northampton?
We might want to restate the question. It was a bit hard to hear. What does the wallpaper look like in Northampton to you?
The town, what does that...
Today or when I first saw it in 1988?
It's okay.
Both. When I first saw it in 1988, it was a lot more hemp. Today, it's too NoHo. It's too gentrified, to be quite honest. I think we are too bifurcated. We're too segregated. That's what I see. That's what I see. I see the older generation being squeezed out, and it makes me very sad. And I think we need to find a way to bring people back in. I saw a lot more. I remember Bonducci's. I remember a more gritty Northampton. I was an immigrant, so I don't know Northampton from the 70s. So I think there are others in this group who know an older Northampton. I know Northampton from 1988 onwards. But I remember a more working class Northampton. There was a bigger working class Northampton. And I saw that a little bit more when I was looking around to buy a house when I first started looking. But I saw that being squeezed out when I came back again, when we moved back from Connecticut here the second time. So in the 30-ish years that I've been in and out of this town, from one coast to another coast to back again, I've seen the change in the social class change. That's what I see. I've seen a social class change. That's what I see most.
Hold on just a moment. We'll come around.
Hi, Buju. Thanks for all the comments. It's great to hear the breadth of the book and your point of view. My question isn't fully formed, but I'm wondering about social media in terms of changing situational, the situation around us and changing the wallpaper. Yeah. What have you thought about that? Because I feel like it's I have an opinion.
Yeah, so I've been thinking recently, so in the book I talk about 4 types of wallpaper: material culture, symbolic culture, representation, the portraits on the wall, the people who are people in high places who are respected and valued, and the 4th one is the hidden rules that some people know that allow them to climb upwards that other people don't know. So in that material culture, I think one type of material culture that can pull us apart or push us together, one type is the physical design of our places, neighborhood design that segregates or integrates. Another type of material culture is the algorithms of social media that originally was supposed to make us friends, but as we know, it actually pulls us apart by pushing more and more content that we want to see. But on the brighter side, there's some research that I talk about in the book that shows that people who organize who know each other in real life, that's key, who originally know each other in real life, and then connect with those people and then organize with people on social media, can push their ideas further along via social media, and be more impactful in their organizing, as long as the initial kernel of their relationship is in real life. But using social media, if the relationship isn't real, it's entirely virtual, the impact, the spreading activation isn't as big. I found that very interesting. We think that the social media activation, that this whole pushing out all the content via social media is very effective. It actually is much more effective if the relationship is initially real. So I'm answering two things. I'm saying that social media segregates rather than integrates. That's one thing. That's the negative side. But I think it can be harnessed in a positive way if the initial relationships are authentic in person.
One hand over here, and then we'll circle back around that way.
Thank you so much for your powerful words and your needed book. And I'm thinking about, as you've spoken about the segregation by class and race, you said that food and teams and music were a place where people could mix. And I'm a pastor, and I was so hoping that churches were on that list. And churches are not on that list. Churches are not on that list. I mean, so I retired from a church in the Hilltowns 8 years ago, and for Hampshire County, it was actually pretty diverse for Hampshire County. And I decided I really wanted to worship in my retirement years in a very mixed setting. So I started traveling through Holyoke and Springfield to find an integrated church. And I couldn't find any. And I ended up joining an all-black church in Springfield, which now, because they're so lovely, have me actually serving as an associate pastor. But churches are not, in fact, a place that are very cross-class or very integrated at all. So when you made your 3 points with your teams and music and food, I thought, oh, how I wish that houses of worship were on that list, and how sad it is that they aren't. I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
That's interesting. Is there not any? Couldn't churches or not just churches? Couldn't people of faith or leaders of faith organize and become a collective or do things They have certainly in the past in this country.
There are often one-time events. There are pulpit swaps, there are dinners, and nothing carries on.
Yeah.
So there are the occasional service project, but nothing carries on. And the white churches stay very white, and the churches who are Latinx or blacks pretty much don't have white people there.
So I have a random idea. I don't have a well-formed thought, but I do have a sort of a totally random idea. So it's making me think of the last first Trump administration when we were in Windsor, Connecticut. We organized at around refugee resettlement at a First Church in Windsor. And it was, I think the church and the mosque in Windsor were involved. And then there were a whole bunch of us who were not affiliated with any particular religious group. But I know the mosque and the church were were two religious groups, communities that were involved. I'm wondering if here we are in that moment again. So I wonder if there's something there in that space. I do think it has to be repeated. The one-off thing doesn't work. I think there is clearly an issue. Let's use this issue or this moment let's use it for good instead of for ill. I've begun to think, and I was talking to the Smith president about this. I think in doing these things, there has to be something light and something heavy. The light thing is the magnet. That's the food, music, sports, right? There has to be something light. There's some levity that brings people together, right? And then the heavy stuff is the thing that is the deeper conversation. So food would be the thing I would suggest. Yeah.
We had one question over here.
Hey, Buju, how you doing?
Hey, Sherry.
I'm not sure what my question actually is, but I'm wondering your thoughts about activism, because I haven't read your book yet, though I will. But it seems like this is a more slow, measured, persistent nudging of change when there is some pent-up emotional desire for instantaneous radical change. And how do you see these two forces not destroying each other, allowing them to move forward? Because I think the goals are often the same, right? But it's, how do you see these dynamics and techniques to sort of manage that? Yeah. It's kind of a big question.
Yeah, it's reminding me of Loretta Ross's book, Calling In and Calling Out. Is that where you were going, Sherry?
So let's just say I went to McGovern's non-coffee and talk, which I wish he had said he wasn't going to have coffee. But, listening around me, you could tell there's a contingent of folks who want to figure out how to practically make change happen. And then there's definitely a contingent that are frustrated and angry about the pace of anything happening at all, right? Because there's a lot of fear, I think, going on. But I've seen that happen in the past with, even in my corporation, right? Trying to make change, that there is contingents of people who are either so wanting it to happen faster that it becomes kind of a drain on trying to get it done, aside from the people who don't want it to happen at all, and that also, is holding it back. And just trying to understand with, changing the wallpaper and doing this kind of pathway to, not consensus, but sort of as coalition and driving forward persistently and nudging. How do you manage the alternate path that, somehow needs to be managed?
Yeah, I don't have a
new research topic.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer to this. I almost think that there are, in one way I want to say that let 1,000 flowers bloom. Like, different people need different things. And all of us need a little bit of both at some point of time or and maybe we need to blow off steam in some way in order to do, maybe we need some sprint sometime in order to do at other times. But I don't know how to convert that into an example. And so that's one. And the other thing is that I think there are some people who are more, they want to go to the more the more radical end. And I'm going to say something that I've thought, this suddenly came to my mind. I think in any movement, you need the two extremes. So you have a Malcolm X and you have a Martin Luther King. In India, you had Gandhi and you had a Netaji, like somebody who said, for every drop of Indian blood, we'll get a drop of British blood. And you had a nonviolent Gandhi. in some ways, there seems, I don't know if there's always, there often seems to be leaders on both, and I see this in other social movements too. And maybe somehow by having both, it allows everything to move forward. Maybe it allows violent stuff to move forward because there is the risk of the stick. I don't know. I don't quite know what to do with it, but I see your point. All I know is that in the end, it is the slow and incremental change that ultimately will not burn us out. I also think, this is not what you were asking, I also think that identity politics has not served us well. It has not served us well. And I think the cancel culture has not served us well, and we need to stop doing that. But that's not where you were coming from.
We are just at 7:25. We can either wrap it or take one more question, depends on your preference. Keep going?
Let's take one more question,
Okay.
and then we
gotta
have
get ready.
book signing and refreshments out in the lobby.
Buju, thank you very much for writing the book and sharing it with us, and your metaphors. And you gave one metaphor that I'd like to see if you could extend it a little bit, because I've been thinking about it since you said it, with the seed and the soil, because that's only two components. You know, if you try to grow a plant in a closet without any moisture, it's definitely not going to survive, and it's not going to flourish. So in that sense, how would you extend that metaphor to rain and climate?
Yeah, so I would say the fertile soil part, I'm sort of including the rain and the sun and all of these other elements are essentially, by extension, just riffing off that metaphor, are the other people, are the other relationships in that seedling's life, without whom that seedling would not survive. So in the book, I actually talk about how we treat talent as an individual characteristic, but talent is actually not. If you look at the research on talent, you actually trace people's success to relationships around them, and without those relationships, that individual would not have succeeded. And some of the research shows if you take in organizational behavior in the business world, if you take somebody who's considered a star and you plop them and they move to another company, in that other company, they actually don't look like a star. Why? Because it's the team that made them talented. Absent that team, they don't look quite so good anymore. But you don't know that. They're treated like a star and compensated like a star. But they're really not. It's all about the team. So anyway, my point is maybe the sun and the rain and all of that are the part of the team, is what I would say. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I want to thank
you.
Buju. Yes.
This was great. Thank you. I would say if you have ideas about putting this stuff into action beyond a one-off, I feel like I'm experimenting. I'm in the world of, this is an idea, now I want to see it implemented. So if you have thoughts, let's talk.
We'll be signing books out in the lobby.